This video is sponsored by BolterBunny.com. This week, we're going to make trees, and it's not going to cost a thing. Some things you'll need: oats, rocks, moss gathered from trees and/or rocks. You will need more moss. Twigs. That's it. So we're going to cut out our base shape now using any utility knife. Now you can use something thicker. I just wanted to keep this build as cheap as possible. This was recycling, so. Now we're going to glue our tree down to the base using hot glue. Spend a moment to figure out how it looks best positioned. So now we're going to lay out some rocks. Rocks will add some weight and some heft to this. When I did this layout, I made sure that all the rocks were right next to each other, kind of building a miniature rock wall in the back. When doing this project before, I've noticed that whenever I apply wet PVA glue, the cardstock base will warp, and in some cases warp badly. So how I avoided that this time was by forming a rock wall that was glued to the base and then gluing all the rocks to each other so that the piece essentially had a spine. Here I'm using PVA glue, and I'm also going to use tacky glue to glue all the rocks to each other just to make sure nothing moves. You can see me wedging in some rocks to cover the PVA. Now we're going to black bomb everything: the rocks, the base, and the tree. For this, I used a very wide, pointed end brush because you have to get into the cracks between the rocks, and that's just harder to do with a flat brush. Save yourself the time. Always the best part, that first gray overbrush on the rocks. Paint the trunk of the tree using a dark brown. Now hit it with a tan or an off-white. It really picks out the highlights. Now, if you were doing a blasted hellscape or perhaps a swamp, you could stop right here. This is a dead tree, but I prefer living trees, so we're going to keep going. Using a light brown, give the trunk a heavy overbrush. So the washes we made for the first video I did, the ruined tower, were not put in what would be considered an airtight container, and they just dried up. So I cheated and I used Agrax Earthshade here. So my PVA glue, the Elmer's, was starting to get all funky. The nozzle was all jacked up. So I was at the Dollar Tree and I saw these and I thought I'd give them a try. These are $1 PVA glues. They're called Jot and they worked out really well. If your dollar store carries them, pick up a bunch. I have claimed the dill as a legitimate spoil of war and flocking material. The kitchen will never get it back. Waste not, want not. Always put paper down when you're flocking. So because my first attempt was so warped, I wanted to make sure this one wasn't. I tried to weigh it down with varying amounts of success. Alright, let's bring this tree to life. It's time to glue on the moss. Use your hot glue gun. When I was at the Dollar Tree getting glue, I noticed these things of moss. Now, I didn't use any of them, but you certainly can if moss doesn't grow readily in your area. Use a lot of hot glue. You will get it on you, and it'll sting a little bit, but then your fingers will toughen up, and you'll be fine. As you go, make sure you're picking off all the little threads that the hot glue leaves behind. You don't want them to get hit with paint. After you have your tree assembled, make sure to spray it a couple of times with water, PVA glue mixture, and a spray bottle. Do this a few times. It'll make a nice solid structure. Now we're just going to paint. We're going to hit it with a dark green and then a light green. And don't forget, my friends, whenever you complete a step, whether it be gluing or painting or any other step, make sure your piece is completely dry before moving on to the next. So, before painting, I didn't show it, but the leaves have 3 coats of the PVA spray on them. They are solid, and I chose to use the brush I never use for anything else. It's this weird fan-shaped brush. It took the paint and found all the little nooks and crannies and actually really saved a lot of time on this step when I put on the light green. If you have a weird brush like this, and most cheap sets have one, use it. So we're pretty much done here, and I'd just like to take a moment to thank everyone who subscribed or liked or commented on my videos this week. I never thought that I'd get so many people so fast. 50 subscribers within a month is huge for me. And I'd just like to thank you all for being here and to let you know it means the world to me. I'll be churning out one of these videos every week for the foreseeable future, so I'm glad you're here and I hope you stick around. So I'd really like to see however you folks did trees. Feel free to send them to me at peasantlevelterrain@gmail.com, and if I see something great, I'll put it up in the next vid. This video is sponsored. So I'd love to see how you did with this or whatever other ideas you have for making a forest. Please feel free to send me any picture you would... not any picture you would like. This is the internet. No. So thanks for staying all the way to the end of the video. I wanted to show you something pretty cool. This moss that I picked out of a tree has been in this Tupperware for over a year, right? And I noticed something when I was wetting it down. I'm going to wet down the one on the left here. Thing is that when you hydrate it again, even with a glue mixture, it comes back to life. Look at everything spring out the moment water touches it, as opposed to when it's dry. I don't know if you're like me, but I think that's pretty cool. And I just thought I'd show you real fast. So, yeah, this has been in there for over a year, just sitting. I wanted to make sure nothing was alive on it. But apparently the moss was still going, so there's that. Cheers, we'll see you next week.